The NJSpotlight Roundtable series presents The Promise of Offshore Wind. This program was recorded February 17th, 2011, in Trenton, New Jersey. This program is sponsored by Atlantic Wind Connection, Garden State Offshore Energy, and GE Energy. In this episode, members of the vendor panel make their opening remarks, introduced by Tom Johnson, energy editor of NJSpotlight.
Now we'll go to Rob Gibbs at Garden State Offshore Energy. They're one of the developers Michelle mentioned that are planning to build offshore, and they've made some news lately, so why don't you talk about it, Rob?
Thanks, Tom. Again, I'm Rob Gibbs, Garden State Offshore Energy. I also work for PSEG. As a developer, and there are several in the room, and some of us have been out front for a long time. Our biggest thought process is what are the challenges that we face, and how do we overcome those challenges and move forward? And offshore wind has its very fair share of challenges, notably, obviously, on the federal side with the permitting timeline and the interaction that we're going to have with all the different federal agencies that will have a say in what we do. But on the state side, what we're looking at is how best to help the state achieve the goals that it's set out in the Offshore Wind Economic Development Act and the regulations that just came out last week. And so when we look at those regulations and what we look at the goal of the legislation, we say, really what does the state want? And it's jobs. It's obviously renewable energy, or else they wouldn't be pursuing it. But this is an emerging industry, and anytime you have an emerging industry, it presents the opportunity for real job creation and economic growth in a state. And so at Garden State, when we were thinking about this, we've been thinking about it for a long time, we started thinking about scale on our project and how the scale of our project could impact economic development. And it's not the only path forward. We're not saying it's the only path, but we believe it's one of the best paths forward in terms of taking a project, scaling it to an appropriate size, and then leveraging the purchasing power, the scheduling power of that scaled project, so that you can give manufacturers and vendors what we call a sustained orderly queue of orders that will give them the confidence to invest millions and millions of dollars in the state of New Jersey and bring manufacturing jobs, service jobs, technical jobs to the state. And so, we're working very hard internally on refining that concept, thinking about the concept, whether it's right for us, whether it's right for the state of New Jersey. And, when you have that demand stability, when you have that, that scale, you can bring meaningful change and opportunity to the state. It's really the key hurdle at this point. And it's not just jobs in terms of our component, our supply chain, but you have to look at vessel availability, which is questionable in the United States. There are some vessels maybe out of the Gulf that can handle some of the initial work. But if the industry gets to the scale that the country, as an industry, we would like it to see get to, you really have to start thinking about the kind of vessels that exist in Europe, and there are multiple vessels of those sizes. The supply chain, the turbine vendors, the cabling, manufacturing, the blades. There's 6,000 to 8,000 components in a turbine, and they have to be built somewhere. And obviously, the state would like to see them built here. We'd like to see them built here. And again, it's really the opportunity. It's an emerging opportunity to capture some of this momentum. And at Garden State, we've thought very hard on this concept. And again, we do think that scaling the project up to 1,000 megawatts could be the response. So,
thanks, Rob. And now we have Rich Reno from GE. They're one of the manufacturers of wind turbines, and Rich can talk about the company's vast experience in offshore wind and onshore wind.
Thank you, Tom. Talk a little bit about our role in offshore wind, as well as some of the the challenges and opportunities that we see. But before I do, just a little history on GE and wind. We entered the wind industry about 10 years ago with the acquisition of a small turbine OEM, and with investment in technology of about $1.5 billion over the last 10 years, we've turned that small company into an industry leader globally, but specifically here in the U.S., where about 1 out of every 2 turbines installed is GE's, something we're very proud of. And we did this by taking that technology investment and using it to drive the efficiency and the availability of our products to new levels in the industry, and also using our industrial base and industrial knowledge to drive our production from 10 turbines a week to about 13 turbines a day. And we're excited to be able to bring this technology and our experience into the offshore space. So that's our role. And our role also, GE as a company, in solving some of the world's greatest challenges. And offshore, as Rob said, has got its share of challenges, and one of the biggest ones is cost. And we learned that firsthand in 2003 when we were one of the pioneers in offshore wind, putting 7 purpose-designed machines off the coast of off the coast of Ireland at a project called Arklow. And what we learned at that time was the technology of 2003 wasn't ready for offshore deployment, and the world in general wasn't ready to support what it would take to get this industry off the ground. So we decided that that's not an industry that we can afford to invest the amount of money that we need to make products for the sustainable industry. So we focus on onshore, and the history is as I just described it. But over time, you could see things were changing in Europe, particularly in the UK and in Germany, where policies were changing that we felt could drive the growth in offshore wind, and with that growth could drive the cost down. So we're back. And I think us being back in this space is because we believe that with what we can bring to the table, we can solve the challenge of costs and some of the other challenges with offshore wind and make this a sustainable industry. And also in line with what Rob said, one of the challenges for cost is scale. Right, the project that we put off the coast of Ireland was 7 turbines, and with that you bear the burden of all of the overhead associated with mobilizing equipment to build an offshore wind farm, but you can only amortize it over a very small fleet. So, in order to get the cost down to a level that will allow the industry to grow and sustain, you got to have scale. And the U.S. is getting started on that, particularly here in New Jersey, where you have a gigawatt that is supported by legislation that will allow developers to go get PPAs, and I think that's a commendable first step, and hopefully something that can be followed throughout the U.S. But even with that 1 gigawatt, just as a point of comparison, the UK is one of the leaders in offshore wind, the single biggest installed base today, and probably the largest announced pipeline going forward. And the big development there is what they call UK Round 3. UK Round 3 is 32 gigawatts, so 32,000 megawatts, and the average project size in that 32,000 megawatts is 3.5 times New Jersey. And they did that so they could drive scale for the industry, drive the kind of growth that would be needed to invest in jobs, and drive the cost down. So I think what New Jersey has done is fantastic, but we need to see more of that for this industry to continue to grow in the U.S. and be sustainable. But the good news is, on the opportunity side, the resource in the U.S. offshore wind is fantastic, particularly here on the East Coast, where you've got tremendous load centers of electricity demand along the coast, and challenges if you would want to try to bring renewable energy in from somewhere outside of those states. And in our view, the conditions in New Jersey are the sweet spot of the East Coast. So we're happy to see the things starting to take shape here, and really the birth of the industry in the U.S., and commend fishermen for this development project, which we think is a great first step to show to the world that the U.S. is into offshore wind.
Thanks. The PPA that Rob mentioned, that's power purchase agreements, the long-term contracts by which the wind developers get a steady stream of payments for the electricity they generate. In the gigawatts, 1,000 megawatts. right? Okay. And now we have Robert Mitchell of Atlantic Wind Connection. They've been in the news lately, too. They just made a filing with the federal government to build the first phase of a $5 billion system that would provide the backbone transmission system for offshore wind farms up and down the eastern seaboard.
Thank you. Can everybody hear okay in the back? I guess you can. Well, Tom, thank you very much for the invitation and for New Jersey Spotlight board and team to put this together. It's a pleasure to be here and to be with your distinguished panel. The Atlantic Wind Connection has made a pretty strong commitment throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, including New Jersey. And I want to introduce some of the people on our New Jersey team that is here today. Really pleased to introduce to you Chris Olaf. Chris, why don't you stand up so people can see you? Chris is going to be joining our Atlantic Wind Connection project a week from Monday and is a resident here in New Jersey and will be responsible for permitting. Used to work with Peter Mandelstam. And Brian Lee, who's head of communications and outreach, also from New Jersey, Tom Constantino, Jason Tosches, and Steve Sohm. So just want you to know that these folks are here to answer any questions that you may have. There's so many of you in the audience that are influential in this whole area and certainly could be panel members here as well. I see folks from Fishermen, led by Danny Cohen, and Peter Mandelstam with Blue Water, and I didn't see who's here with offshore, MW Offshore. Who is here from?
Lance Miller is here representing offshore.
Okay, great. I heard Michelle make reference to that. But I think that one of the reasons that we're going to have the launching of a new and successful industry, offshore wind industry in the Mid-Atlantic, is because we have some really terrific people who are proposing to build wind farms along with PSCG. And there are others who are interested and are making plans, and I think there's a lot of talent, a lot of financial resources that are being allocated to it, and I'm absolutely confident that we're going to be successful. The Atlantic Wind Connection project is a private sector effort that's really doing what the federal government should have been doing some time ago. This country is faced with the reality that we really do not have a substantive national energy policy. And what the backbone proposal that we are doing is a 10-year plan, which is the way we ought to be at least 10 years thinking about energy. And it is indeed a backbone that will enable scale. You heard my colleagues on the panel talk about scale. If I had to title my speech, it would be Scale, Scale, Scale. That's what's going to enable the economic development to take place in New Jersey and the other states in the Mid-Atlantic. Without scale, we're going to end up with maybe 2, 3, 4 wind farms over this 350-mile area. And there's nothing wrong with that. That will be great. But it isn't realizing the true vision and the true potential. And it's not enough scale that is going to enable manufacturing to be attracted to New Jersey and the other states. I had lunch this week earlier with a turbine manufacturer who's a big proponent and supporter of the backbone transmission concept. And he said, if you are successful, then we have a chance of being successful. And if you can show that there will be orders that will be placed and over a period of time so that there can be reach this scale, we will build manufacturing facilities in the Mid-Atlantic. And if we do that, their prediction is that there will be 7 to 10 cents will be the cost of offshore wind in just 5, which I think is a bit optimistic, but between 5 and 10 years. The Department of Energy has come up with an estimate that it will be 2035 before we get down to 7 cents. But again, it really has to do with scale. And if you look at what has happened on onshore wind, the price of onshore wind has dropped dramatically. And that's happened because they have reached scale, because the machines have gotten more efficient, and the machines have gotten bigger. And that is what is going to take place in the offshore wind industry as well. There are 2 ways to bring wind to shore. And we're really not in competition with any of the wind developers who want to build their own transmission lines directly to shore. It's just that we believe that if we can build the backbone, if we can produce a product on time and at a price that works for the ratepayers of New Jersey and the other mid-Atlantic states, that we then incur great opportunities. And we will be able to reach scale. Professor at the University of Delaware, Willett Kempton, has done a study that shows that if you can tie together several wind farms up and down the coast, that you will gain efficiencies because the wind is blowing at some point, at some time, and it blends this resource so that one of the criticisms of wind is its variability. And that removes, or at least reduces, the variability a great deal. We also think that the backbone will enable the wind farm developers to go a little further offshore, further removing the visibility issue, further removing the issue of bird and sea mammal migration, and the wind, in fact, have proven to be stronger the further out you go. I don't want to go on and on. I could, obviously, pretty excited about this project and the opportunity, but I think sufficient to say that I was able to attract financing from Google and from Good Energies and Moribeni, who's a Japanese trading company, because they also see the vision of what is possible and what a backbone will enable. I've been involved with developing transmission all over the United States over the last 11 years. And with renewable energy, there's usually one major problem. And the problem is transmission. So if we can remove that with a master plan that will get built, if in fact the wind farms are going to be built, we're not going to propose building a transmission line out in the ocean if there's no wind farms. But assuming that that all happens, we will enable this industry to really gain scale. Thank you for having me, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. You mentioned that you hope to bring the cost of offshore wind down to 7 cents, 10 cents?
Well, I was quoting a turbine manufacturer who made that statement.
Well, for the audience's sake, what is the cost of projected cost of offshore wind now? In kilowatts.
You said Jeff, you mean Bob? Yeah. You're asking me? Well, there are others who can talk to that who've actually signed PPAs. But it's in the range of 20 cents, maybe a little higher than that. Interestingly enough, Rob, if I can quote what I heard from you folks, that even at that price, which is higher than gas and coal and so on, but that also does not take into account all of the extra costs that we're incurring through ill health and from coal, et cetera. The impact on the ratepayers in New Jersey would be rather insignificant. And the benefits that would accrue to the ratepayers is significant in my opinion.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this program from NJ Spotlight. If you have comments or suggestions, please email them to info@njspotlight.com. NJ Spotlight, where issues matter, on the web at njspotlight.com. For everyone at NJ Spotlight, this is Steve Lubetkin. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you out there on the net. Take good care.